Every time it rained, it was just money on the roof.
Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, an episode for everyone who shares my frustration with fast-melting ice cubes. It's the essential addition to most drinks you order on a night out. But we often don't appreciate its input into keeping our bevy cold until it's gone, at which point we're complaining about a watery drink and the mess the condensation has made on the table. I'm at the Nightcar Bar in central Auckland, catching up with Conor Whale, former bartender, now known as the Ice Guy. It's an unusual way to make a living.
How can you make money off hard water?
That was his family's initial reaction to his new business idea. But we're not talking about ordinary ice here. What's so special about it that inspired Conor to take the plunge into the ice business and create the Bar Society?
Well, when I was in Melbourne, we had a really cool cocktail program. For years, I had been making clear ice in the bar, which is a finicky, time, expensive ordeal to go through. But that's something that a bartender or a chef just deals with. There's heaps of prep. The amount of ice that you can actually produce inside of a bar is relatively limited as well. And a company had started in Melbourne called Navy Strength Ice Company. And I was working with a big restaurant group, and we decided to purchase their ice in for all of our restaurants. Working out the math, if I was producing ice myself in a bar and then having myself and the staff cut it and prepare it, the average bartender, depending on how practiced they are in making ice and cutting ice, you'd probably make 10 to 15 cubes an hour. When you cost out how much that is in wages, you're looking between $2 and $3 a cube. By the time you get that into a glass and there's, margins and everything on the end result of the cocktail for the customer, you end up with a pretty expensive drink. And I would much rather utilize that time and energy of myself and staff working on something that is going to keep driving us forward to improve, as opposed to something that we just have to do repetitively to be able to stay at the same level. When Navy Strength Ice started, I could buy ice cubes in at about $1 each. So I was already saving 50% in the cost of the ice. Plus, it was also more consistent. So everything was perfectly square. Everything was the exact same size. Every drink went out looking exactly the same. And that, I think, is one of the most important things when it comes to hospitality, is that consistency. Because if you go to your favorite venue and you have an old-fashioned, you want that old-fashioned to taste amazing, and then say you go away and you come back the next week and it tastes different, it's disappointing for the guest. And so you want that consistency. And so when we were relatively consistent in making our drinks, we wanted to have that same consistency in the presentation. Once all the restaurants shut down with COVID, came back to New Zealand, did a bit of research, and there wasn't really anyone aggressively doing clear ice as a wholesale supplier. So I just dove right into it, did a little bit of research, found out the machines and everything that I'd require, and the process is a little bit different to what I would normally do in a bar by hand. It's a little bit more heavy machinery and bigger blocks. But that's pretty much how it started. And I was coming from not being in New Zealand for a good 10 years to then having to immerse myself right into the middle of Auckland to talk to the best cocktail bars I could to see if I could get involved with them. And really, the idea behind it was I see large format clear ice as being the easiest and cheapest way to help elevate the drinks in your venue, regardless on if you're fine dining or you're casual or you're a pub. You can make all of your drinks look better by using that one simple ingredient. And so our motto with the Bar Society is to elevate the drinking experience. And that's exactly what we've tried to do.
While many spent lockdown baking banana bread and finding their Inna Marie condo, he was busy welding containers and catching raindrops on his parents' property in Taupo.
So I took two 20-foot shipping containers. We cut the middle out of them, welded them together. Me and my dad built a little walk-in freezer, 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters. We brought one ice machine called a Klein Bell from America. Got that shipped over. We brought a butcher's bandsaw that was all stainless steel. And that's pretty much it. That's how it started. Brought a engine hoist to help lift the blocks out of the machine because they weigh probably about 150 to 200 kilos a block, depending on, how much they've frozen. And so that's essentially how it started. A little freezer and a shipping container with one machine and one man on a bandsaw. We've moved to our new facility now out by the airport in Hamilton. And so we're town supply water. But where we first started out in the containers was all rainwater catchment. And so it was really the purest water we could get. Every time it rained, it was just money on the roof. And that would go into the water tanks. We would put that through another filter to make sure it was super clean. And that's what we would fill up all of the bays with. And so everyone that had the pleasure of enjoying a drink on our ice cubes was drinking some real pure over Taupo rainwater that had been filtered.
Nice. Cheap way as well, right?
Super cheap. Super cheap. Free water. It falls from the sky. You wouldn't believe it.
Exactly. In the beginning, this venture was all a one-man show.
I would package everything into polystyrene boxes. I would chuck them into my little Mitsubishi Lancer, and I would drive them from Taupo to Auckland for at least the first 18 months until we grew, and then my partner came on board, and then we grew a little bit more, and because I was doing a lot of the deliveries myself, that meant I had less time in the factory. So then we had another guy come on, Kim, and he is now our main ice cutter, and so he would be smashing it out in the containers. My partner Amanda would be doing all the admin and marketing and doing accounts, and I'd be on the road delivering to Auckland or the Hawke's Bay, New Plymouth, Hamilton, some in Tauranga, the Mount, and trying to get around. Only 6 months ago, we moved out of our little container ship setup, and we have now moved into a nice, big, brand new building out by Hamilton Airport. Just our walk-in freezer now is the size of the old entire factory. And so, production has increased. We've got the room to expand, and it's time to start delivering to the rest of the country.
At first glance, the financial gains of selling ice look pretty shaky. But now the Bar Society is supplying its products to over 30 venues across the North Island.
Auckland is definitely our busiest market at the moment. So every Tuesday, we're delivering to Auckland. We look after the Hawke's Bay fortnightly. And then we've got a venue in New Plymouth that we deliver to probably once every 3 weeks and things like that. And about a year ago, we got a freezer truck. And so the Mitsubishi Lancer got to...
I was going to ask, are we still transporting in the Mitsubishi?
No, the old Lancer has been retired from a delivery vehicle, which is good. We call it Ivan the Ice Truck. And he does a lot of work for us, shipping around the country.
But how is this frozen water different from the $4 bag you grab at the bottle store on your way home? What's clear ice? What makes it different?
So clear ice is a very dense type of ice. Standard ice that you would put in a mold that you would get in your freezer, when you look at it, it's got all your frosty bits in it. That is essentially trapped air. That trapped air opens up what I call like little veins to the exterior of the ice, which allows temperature to get in, and the ice melts a little bit faster. And they're small, so you have a lot of surface area, which also increases that melt time. And so when you're producing clear ice, you have the ability to cut it into a larger piece so that you only have one in the glass at a time. And that means there's a lot less surface area in contact with the liquid. And because of the method and how we freeze it, we take all of those air bubbles out. And so when you take the air bubbles out, you end up with a really... to describe it, you would say the ice crystals stack very uniformly on top of each other as the ice grows. And so that keeps it very dense and compact, which doesn't have any of the little veins that allow the outside temperature or the outside liquid to get inside, which doesn't start, increasing that melt rate. And that's pretty much it. It's a very, very simple sort of thing.
So would most cocktail bars make that themselves?
I don't know if I'd say most, but a lot do. Cocktail bars that really appreciate the finer things and put a lot of emphasis on the customer enjoyment level of the drink. It has to taste good, but it also has to look good. And there's that old saying, you eat with your eyes. It's the same with drinks. If something comes out to the table and it looks amazing, you just feel happy about drinking it. And then the added bonus is that it tastes amazing.
So take me through the process. How do you make it?
Yeah, so the simplest answer is directional freezing. So directional freezing means that it's essentially freezing in one direction. So if I was to put water in a mold and put that in the freezer, you're freezing it with cold energy, 360 degrees. So each outside face is going to freeze first, and the inside is going to remain liquid. Now, water and air expand by 10% if we get technical when they go below zero. And so when you've frozen the outside and then the inside starts to freeze, you've got little dissolved air bubbles that are inside the water. And as they freeze and expand, that's what gives you your frostiness. And so that stops you from being able to make it clear. The machines we use replicate the natural sort of process of the earth. So if you've ever seen clear ice appear on a river or a lake, it's because it's insulated by the earth on three sides. You have a current, which is dragging impurities and air bubbles downstream, and the cold air is only hitting it at one side, and so it's allowing it to freeze down in layers, and the direction is down. So that's where the term directional freezing comes from. We have a big rectangle bay that has freezing coils at the bottom. In the top, we have a little fish pump. We'll line it with a plastic liner so that nothing leaks. We'll fill it up with about 225 litres of water, and over the course of 3.5 to 4 days, it'll slowly start freezing up in layers from the bottom, and the big machine box that it's in is all insulated on the other side, so you have that directional freezing, and the fish pump moving the water around replicates the current of the stream. Clear ice in cocktails really started in Japan, from my knowledge, about 30 plus years ago, where they could use crystal clear glacial ice. Over in America, there is a really big ice sculpture sort of community. And so technically the machines that we use are for ice sculptors. And so it would allow them to produce massive blocks of clear ice that they can carve into certain shapes. And so we just really stole that idea. And instead of cutting it into sculptures, we cut it into sculpted squares.
So it doesn't melt as quickly, is that right?
Correct, yeah. So it doesn't melt as quickly, and that's based on essentially the density of the ice and how there's a lot less surface area. If I had, 10 to 15 small ice machine cubes in there, and each of those has, 5 centimeters of surface area, you take that 5 centimeters, you times it by 10, you got 50 centimeters of surface area. All of your liquid's going to be touching that, whereas if we make one 5 centimeter cube, we're going to reduce that to a fraction of that, and you will end up with less surface area, less room for the liquid to touch, which means a slower melt. And that is really to preserve the integrity of the cocktail. Bartenders, especially really talented cocktail bartenders, are just the same as really talented chefs. And when a chef puts a steak or a chicken dish up on the pass, they want it to go to the table hot. The same as if a dessert chef puts an ice cream up on the pass, they want it to go to the table as ice cream, not cream. A bartender is exactly the same. There's a whole lot of different laws you kind of play within, well, not laws, but rules that you play within being a bartender. When you craft a cocktail, research has been done that between 18 and 14% ABV is kind of the ideal range.
By the way, in case you didn't know, because I didn't, ABV is the percentage of alcohol that's in your drink.
Something that everyone will know is like vodka, 40%. So that's 40% ABV, or 80 proof, if we want to get more technical. The proof is always double the ABV. And so, yeah, between that sort of 18 to 14% alcohol range is perfectly palatable. It's enough that you can taste the alcohol and the other flavors, and it's not too much that you're going to end up with that burn after the end, because that's really not what you're drinking a cocktail for. You know the cocktail is strong, but if it's perfectly made, it should be relatively smooth, and you'll be able to know there's booze in there. But it's not going to be just like taking a shot of tequila or something. It's going to be a little bit weaker. And so when a bartender crafts a cocktail, they want it to taste perfect, and typically when they've finished shaking it, stirring it, throwing it, doing whatever they need to, they've tasted it and they know that it's perfect and what it needs to be. So when you pour that on some ice, that is going to keep the integrity of the cocktail. It's not going to water it down too much. You got one guest that drinks cocktails in 5 minutes, and you've got another guest that sits on it for 20 minutes. You want it to taste as good as it can over that entire period of time. You don't want one person to get a really good tasting cocktail and the other person to get a watered down cocktail just because they chose to drink it a little bit slower. So it helps preserve all of the effort that's gone into making the cocktail to start with.
Now, while Conor isn't sculpting angels or Roman gods or great leaders into big statues, although never say never, he does cut the multi-ton weighing frozen block into different shapes and sizes, which isn't just for looks.
So here at the Night Car, we do some little tiny spears for flutes, for a champagne flute where they put one of their cocktails in. We also do a 45ml cube for their small rocks glasses. So I would say that is probably aimed more towards spirits on the rocks, because what a bartender term a wash line. You want the line of liquid to come mainly below the top of the glass, so it's not overflowing and spilling on the table, but also below the top of the ice cube as well. And that will allow the ice cube to sit flat on the bottom of the glass, and that there reduces one more surface that the liquid is touching. But also you don't want to be in a situation where your ice cube is too big for your glass and every time you take a sip, you're rubbing your nose on it. Cubes we recommend for spirits on ice. A rock is perfect for a cocktail. You know, say you're having one shot of whiskey, that's 30 mils. Then you have a Negroni, which you've got 30 mils of three different, liqueurs and spirits. So then you end up with a 90 mil cocktail. If you put that on a 45 mil cube, the cube is going to be too small compared to the volume, and it's going to be floating around and look like a little iceberg, So we'd do a rock, it has more weight. It'll sit on the bottom of the glass. It'll allow the liquid to come up to within sort of a centimetre of the top of the ice cube, which is a really nice wash line. Hopefully your ice cube's sitting a good 0.5 to 1 centimetre below the top of the glass, and your levels look right. It's the same sort of idea when you plate something up or you garnish something. You want it to be balanced, and you want it to be symmetrical, and you want it to look nice. You don't want things to look out of place. The next size and shape we do is a spear, which is essentially for any tall glasses. So you could chuck a gin and tonic, and that just same thing again. It keeps the integrity of the cocktail. The spears look really cool. They're one of my favorite. So we do 4 sizes of those at the moment. 3 of them are all 125 millimeters long. So what's that, 12.5 centimeters? And they range from 30 square, 35 square, or 40 mil square. And then for here at the Night Car, we do a custom one, which is 43 mil square and 140 long. They use a little bit of a bigger style of glass. That's also the beauty of us starting with one massive block and then chopping it down, as we can do custom sizes, because everyone's going to use a different style of glass. Maybe the cocktail has different volumes in it, things like that. We want to make sure it all looks good, so we have the ability to do those custom sizes.
And for something a bit extra, he also does stamped ice.
What the stamp is essentially a heavy brass CNC engraved piece of metal that will have the logo of whatever anyone wants imprinted on the ice. And it kind of works along the same thermodynamics as the ice tempering and things like that. Brass and copper are really good thermal conductors. That's why they get used, for hot water cylinders and things like that. They can keep that temperature. So when you take a room temperature brass or copper stamp and you put it on some ice, it's going to start melting instantly. It is straight away. So it's perfect for when a bartender is setting up. They've put their glass on the bar, they've put their ice in the glass, they can put their stamp on top of the ice, and within about 5 seconds, that stamp is going to be imprinted on top of the ice, and they can take the stamp off while they finish crafting the cocktail and then pour it off to the side of the ice cube. And so it happens really, really quick. So it just, the thermodynamics of the metal pull that energy away really, really quickly. You don't need to heat the stamp or anything like that. Just room temperature sitting on the bar is perfectly fine. If you were at home, you could keep it in the cupboard. Every time you have a drink, you could quickly stamp the ice. It takes 2 seconds. So we do 2 different options, and we'll deliver that to the customer with their ice, and they can have it on site. It's theirs to keep. Or the other option is that if they want us to stamp the ice for them, and then you don't really have to do any extra steps at the bar. You can just put it in there. Everything looks perfect. Really, really good for functions. If you've got 50 people coming in wanting a drink all at once, really cool to have 50 stamped ice cubes that you can just line up straight away. There's no mucking around or anything like that. Whereas if you were stamping them all by yourself at the speed of service, it's obviously going to take a little bit longer, and maybe the metal would get a bit cold, and so you'd have to dip it in some warm water or something like that.
The science doesn't stop once the ice reaches the venue. Have you ever heard of tempered ice?
Tempering, in short, is letting it come up to room temperature. If you've ever pulled a really hot glass out of a dishwasher and then put cold water in it, it'll shatter. And so ice does essentially the same thing. So when it comes out of a freezer at negative 18 degrees, you put it in a glass, that's probably room temperature, about 20 degrees. And you could be putting, say you pour a whiskey on it, that whiskey's probably going to be room temperature as well. So you've got almost a 40-degree temperature difference in between the liquid and the ice, and it will crack, and we call it thermal shock. So if that thermal shock happens, you'll get some cracks show up in the ice. Some people, myself included, think it looks pretty cool when they've cracked, and other people, myself included, thinks it looks really cool just clear. So we opt for the clearer side of things. We think it looks better across the board and it's more consistent. And so tempering essentially is taking the ice block out of the freezer, letting it sit on the bench or in your glass for a minute or so, and then pouring your drink on top, which is really convenient for being in a bar. I always think of the bartender in mind. The first thing you set up to make a drink is your glassware, because you want the guests to be able to see what their drink is going to go into. You want to ice that glass, especially if you're using a nice big block, and they can get a little bit of theatre and some enticing views while you craft their cocktail, and then they get excited when you pour it over top of the ice. And that will just allow it to come up to room temperature a little bit more. So after you've finished making your drink, you can pour it over top. It's going to remain crystal clear and not have any thermal cracking. And you'll notice the difference in the ice. It'll start off with a frosty look, and that frosty look will slowly dissipate. And when that dissipates, it's kind of perfectly tempered. And, there's a bit of wiggle room in terms of temperature, but really cold and then really warm is not the recipe.
Despite loving what he's doing, Conor does have one small complaint.
It's cold. You spend a lot of time being cold.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I kind of saw that one coming. But clearly the stars aligned, and Conor's childhood in the snow was the perfect base to prepare him.
Having an ice business, there's a lot of benefit to growing up in places like Taupo and Awakuni area, where it's always cold and wet, and you essentially live that life in a freezer. So all of the cutting is done in a temperature-controlled room. Everything gets stacked in the freezer immediately after it's cut. Warm jackets, thermals, gloves, everything, the whole 9 yards, beanies. Yeah, you gotta enjoy the cold.
So next time you're out with your mates, take a moment to notice what's keeping your drink cold. It might just have been made by the Iceman himself. That's all from us today. The Detail is supported by NZ On Air and RNZ. This episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Alexia Russell. Thank you to Conor Whale. I'm Davina Zimmer. Ka kite anō.